Really interesting intel, so thank you for your time. A little bit of Eric Clapton here for the passing of Georgina Bayer. Someone suggested this track. Zoe, George, Andrew Hogarth, you've been fantastic both. Kia ora. I'm Wallace Chapman. Checkpoint is next with Lisa Owen. I'm back tomorrow, 3:45. See you then.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, the whack-a-mole of road repairs continues on Coromandel Peninsula, State Highway 25. The district's lifeline is only partially open after yet another washout. Waka Kotahi joins us, and the local mayor's live on what it means for the economy, tourism and even the school run. Finally, Auckland Council's geotech expert on what's happening beneath the surface in Muriwai. He's live too. Have you filled out your census form yet? The deadline to be counted is fast approaching. And the 80-something-year-old trainee early ed teacher on what he's got in common with under fives. You can watch us live on the RNZ website.
RNZ News at 5. Ahi Marie, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. The government is more than doubling the size of its fund for cyclone-hit farmers and growers, injecting another $26 million into the immediate clean-up. Pastoral and arable farmers can receive up to $10,000. For growers, the cap is $40,000, depending on their size. The Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, says it will allow those without any current income to carry out time-critical immediate jobs.
It's things like repairing fences and culverts, removing silt and debris, and ensuring that stock is being appropriately looked after.
About $17.5 million have already been paid out to almost 3,000 applicants over roughly a fortnight. The state of national emergency has been extended for another week in Tairāwhiti and Hawke's Bay. More than 1,000 households in Auckland have now registered with the government's temporary accommodation service, set up to help those displaced in a natural disaster. Another 322 are in Hawke's Bay, Tairāwhiti, Northland and Waikato. Meanwhile, Waka Kotahi has reopened State Highway 25 on the Coromandel Peninsula to light vehicles only, following a washout that closed the road overnight. The government is rejigging its transport priorities in light of the destruction brought by Cyclone Gabrielle. Cabinet had earlier put emissions reduction at the centre of its next three-yearly transport plan. Political reporter Annika Smith has more.
The government had wanted to put money normally spent on road maintenance towards bus and bike lanes. Ministers are now working on an emergency-style program in light of recent floods. Transport Minister Michael Woods says it will focus on rebuilding roads and bridges, as well as strengthening the system to protect it from extreme weather. Mr Woods says no final decisions, including fuel tax changes, have been made. The proposal will go out for consultation.
Two teenagers charged with murdering a man in Auckland have been remanded in custody after a court hearing today. The 17 and 14-year-old are accused of killing a young father in a fatal road-related assault in Beach Haven on Friday evening. 28-year-old Joshua Tasi died at the scene while passers-by tried to help. The world's first transsexual mayor and MP, Georgina Bayer, has died aged 65 after a long illness. Her political career attracted world attention. Ashley McCall reports.
George Bayer began dressing in female clothing from a young age, and after leaving school moved into the transsexual scene in Wellington, working as a stripper, sex worker, drag queen star and actor. She moved to Wairarapa in the late 1980s and was elected to the Carterton District Council in 1993 before becoming mayor 2 years later. Nominated by Labour for the 1999 election, Georgina Bayer won the Wairarapa seat, defeating broadcaster Paul Henry with the biggest swing in New Zealand that year. She was re-elected in 2002 and was a list MP between 2005 and 2007 when she retired from Parliament. Georgina Bayer was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease in 2013.
Moi mai rā e te rangatira. The Gore District Council has been ordered to pay $129,000 in reparations and legal costs over the death of Lachlan Jones. The 3-year-old was found dead in a council sewage pond in January 2019. New Zealanders are warned to watch out for fake websites and social media accounts claiming to represent the official census, which is tomorrow. Stats NZ's Simon Mason says people should stay vigilant.
First thing is for people to understand that the census is totally free. So if there's any text message or any form of website inducement to pay money, it's inevitably going to be a scam.
Simon Mason is asking people to report any suspicious accounts to CERT NZ. In sport, the Black Ferns have won their 4th straight World Series Rugby Sevens tournament with victory over Australia in Vancouver. New Zealand led throughout the match, eventually winning 19-12 to further enhance their lead at the top of the overall championship standings. Captain Sarah Hedini was named player of the final and says the event was not just about securing another title.
Pretty proud of our girls this weekend. It's been an amazing tournament here in Vancouver. We wanted to tick off qualifying for the Olympics, and doing that and bringing a trophy home back to New Zealand is a really proud moment.
Argentina beat France in the men's final. Maya Wilson knows her best chance of selection in the Silver Ferns Netball World Cup squad is to impress in the goal attack position during the ANZ Premiership. The Stars captain is on the comeback trail from having COVID and has had a limited build-up to the Premiership. Wilson will predominantly be wearing the goal shoot bib for the Stars and says she'll cherish any opportunity she gets at goal attack.
At a Silver Ferns level, I'm playing 2 positions, something that I haven't necessarily played in an ANZ side, and I know to progress my Silver Ferns sort of selection, I need to be practicing that at ANZ level. So it's a balance of between what's actually the best for the team in that moment, but how can I still personally get what I need to get out of it long term.
And the Stars host the Tactics tonight in Auckland to complete the opening round of the ANZ Premiership. That's the news.
Parental worries about poor school test results.
They don't want to know that 3 years later their kid is so far behind the curriculum, by the time you get to the high school, it's almost too late.
As the government ponders improvements.
We've got the best of the academics that are out there working on that at the moment.
And who benefits from National's early childhood tax rebates?
We are going to monitor what happens with fees because it's really important to us that parents see the benefit of this policy directly.
Lifelong learning here on Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Northland, Auckland and Waikato, a few showers, 1 or 2 possibly heavy today, especially in Northland. Clearing to fine in Waikato this evening and elsewhere tomorrow. Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Rotorua. Showers possibly heavy about Coromandel Peninsula through this afternoon. Clearing from the south this evening, fine tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, scattered showers easing this evening, clearing to fine tomorrow. Waitomo to Wellington, including the Central High Country and Waidudapa, mainly fine, isolated showers about Waidudapa, clearing this afternoon. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine weather. Bulla and Westland, fine today, showers developing tomorrow, turning to rain in Westland tomorrow evening. Fiordland, Otago and Southland, mainly fine, rain developing in Fiordland tomorrow afternoon, with a few spots of rain spreading elsewhere tomorrow evening. And Chatham Islands, rain easing to showers this evening, clearing tomorrow. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have news headlines and any traffic news for you at 5:20.
Nā mihi, Evie. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Another day, another major state highway seriously compromised. This time, it's State Highway 25 in the Coromandel from Whangamata to Hikuai, where there's been a washout and the earth below the road is falling away. It's the detour for the detour after the main route to the peninsula washed out in previous storms. In the last few hours, one lane has reopened on the Hammered Highway, but the fragility of the network once again has locals worried. Tom Taylor reports.
First State Highway 25A, now State Highway 25, washed out in the rain and leaving eastern Coromandel towns cut off for much of the day. Last night a big chunk was taken out of the road between Hikuai and Whangamata, forcing a road closure. One lane is now open to light vehicles, but it's under close surveillance.
It is a problem, and it's something that all of the people in our district are very conscious of.
The problem Mayor Len Salt is talking about is access around the Coromandel, with slips and washouts plaguing the area since the start of the year. Tairua has been pincered between the two road closures. Having State Highway 25A knocked out had already increased the travel time from Auckland from 2 hours to 3, taking travellers through Waihi and Whangamata. Now, with the detour in a more fragile state, trucks carrying essential goods must head up the Thames coast through Coromandel Town and Whitianga. Countdown says it can get trucks that way to its Whitianga store. But ongoing road closures are having some impact on online deliveries, and they're working with affected customers on finding alternative solutions. In Tairua, Heiman Alualia's cafe, The Pepe, has already struggled through the summer. This is yet another blow.
It's just another curveball that's come our way now. This is the fourth one in a row. We've had 3 bad summers because of COVID and disruptions, year-round due to COVID for the past 3 years, and this was supposed to be the comeback summer.
Mr. Alualia says several businesses in the town were already talking about closing. While he acknowledges the work of road crews, he says the latest washout highlights the need for urgency.
All the focus and energy should be in getting that 25A fixed as soon as possible.
Steve Mosen owns the Tairua Bus Company, which transports 29 students to schools in the Coromandel and further afield every day. Although the school bus made it through Whangamata and students arrived at Hauraki Plains College in Ngatea this morning, it looks like they'd have to take the long way back.
It was already noticeably washed out, but I think at that time was only half of one lane was affected. But we've since heard now significant further decay of that road has occurred.
Mr. Mosen says the school bus service could be suspended altogether from tomorrow. And like Mr. Alualia, he says finding a solution for State Highway 25A needs to be a priority.
They can bring in Japanese or European engineers. These things don't happen in the Alps. They've made better use of tunnelling and bridges. And in our country, we just don't seem willing to spend the money on the infrastructure.
But he says without immediate support, many businesses will go under. Although the government has announced a $25 million support package for businesses affected by the January flooding and Cyclone Gabrielle, Mr. Mosen says the distribution of these funds has been too slow.
For businesses, it's financial support to pay their staff, because if we lose our staff now, when things do get sorted, it'll be an even worse situation. So those grants that they're talking about, they need to be distributed as soon as possible, otherwise they're going to be faced with multiple foreclosures and layoffs.
At Whangamata Area School, Principal Alistair Luke says about 90 students were unable to make it in this morning due to the washout. Last night's heavy rain also flooded 6 houses in Whangamata, prompting the local fire brigade to send out 2 of its trucks. But Fire Chief Nigel Airy says their efforts to pump water were largely futile.
There's not a lot we can do. The water table is that high in town at the moment that we have trouble pumping water out because it just comes back, somewhere else.
Mr. Airy says the properties affected were mainly garages or sleep-outs, some of them with more than a foot of water gushing through them. Another blow for residents and businesses as the Coromandel becomes increasingly fragile.
Tom Taylor reporting there. Waka Kotahi's National Emergency Response spokesperson, Mark Owen, concedes while State Highway 25 is partially open now, more earth under the road could slip away, damaging it further.
We had an underslip between Hikawai and Whangamata. So we had the geotechnists go out today and assess that, and we are creating a track around the underslip, which is available for light vehicles only at this stage until such time as we can sort of stabilise that area and work out how we can put in a permanent lane for all traffic.
What do you count as a light vehicle?
Well, anything under 3.5 tonnes, typically anything over that is deemed a heavy commercial vehicle. We know that getting freight into some of these areas is critical, so we'll look at how we can do that, but at the moment it is only open to light vehicles for safety reasons.
So essentially a car, you couldn't drive a little truck laden with produce through to some of these centres?
Maybe a very small truck, but weight is the big issue. We don't want to put any excessive weight on an area that's already unstable. So as I said, they've created sort of an extra width through there to get light vehicles through. And as soon as we can work out what the solution is to stabilise it, then we know it's important that we want to get it back open again for heavies. But at this stage, we do have that restriction in place for the safety of all road users. Any idea how long it will take to enable larger vehicles through? No, but we know it's critical and we'll get it open as soon as we can. At this stage, it's difficult to put a timeline on it. Obviously, we've had a lot of rain up in that area, the land is very saturated. And as it dries out and the land relaxes, we do have these issues developing. So it is changing sort of on a daily basis.
When you say it's open for light vehicles and it's a single lane, have you cut into some extra land, or are you using just part of the existing road?
So they've had to cut in and create, probably using a bit of the shoulder of the road on the lane that wasn't affected, but we've got to make sure we have a safety zone between the actual slip face and where vehicles can travel. So there's probably just enough room to allow those lighter vehicles, but nothing that's over-dimensional or too large or too heavy.
You describe it as an underslip. People who are from this area will know that 25A is out of action, right? Didn't that start as an underslip and then just totally disappeared down the side of a hill?
Absolutely. So they're the most challenging when you've got a piece of road falls below the road and creates what we call this underslip, where the land beneath has fallen away, and that makes it really challenging. If you get an overslip, typically you can go in and clear it reasonably quickly, and as long as stuff above is stable. But when it's an underslip, you've got to then work out how you're going to start to rebuild it back up or create a newer road alignment, which may be creating an alternative alignment around the slip.
Don't want to be an alarmist, Mark, but there's no guarantee that more of this road will not just disintegrate, is there?
No, well, I think we're seeing that right across the areas that have been impacted by the rainfall and sort of whole of the sort of upper North Island, as the land is extremely saturated. A lot of our network is in good condition, but a lot of it has been impacted, and so at these specific sites, we'll obviously do our detailed assessment to make sure it is safe. But there is an ongoing risk as things dry out that the land will continue to move. And we just ask people to check before they travel in terms of roads that are open or closed, and certainly just allow extra time for their travel.
But in the Coromandel, how are you stabilising this? How are you stopping this particular road from disintegrating further, given the community has already lost its other major highway?
Yes, we appreciate how critical this route is for access into that whole of that Coromandel Peninsula. So again, our crews will be going out looking at what the permanent fix will be to make the road more resilient. Really, really important for access to those communities.
Is it Waka Kotahi's job to look at alternatives? For example, if it's going to take a while to patch up this road in 25A, I mean, is it your job to start brainstorming stuff like, do we need a ferry that goes from Tairua to Whangamata? Do we need to use boats? Is that part of your remit?
Yeah, absolutely. As we look at what we call the full recovery phase, which is dealing with a lot of our highway network that's been impacted, we certainly will be looking at what the options are to retain reliable access to these communities. And that applies to quite a few areas that have been impacted. I mean, obviously, road is the first choice. A lot of money has been invested in the highways as they stand, so where we can put it back, we will. But it doesn't stop us looking at alternatives in terms of making it more resilient for the future.
Is it guaranteed that 25 and 25A will be put back, as you put it?
Can't answer that at the moment, but certainly we know that 25A is a key route around the Coromandel Peninsula, and 25A was a key connector. So our crews will be looking at what we can do to put in a permanent solution, whether that be on the existing alignment or possibly creating a new alignment.
Okay, so when you say you can't say, is that because you don't know, because you haven't done all the geotech work and you don't know what the solution is, or you don't know because a decision has not been made yet on whether you will put it back?
Well, I suppose there's two phases here. One is putting back a road that gives access to the communities and making that safe so the public can use it. And then in terms of the final permanent solution, putting back smarter, then that's obviously where we may look at, do we build, for example, on 25A, is that a significant retaining feature, or do we need to look at a new alignment, given that the hillside may still be unstable?
And that's Waka Kotahi's National Emergency Response spokesperson, Mark Owen. It is 17 minutes after 5. Interested in your thoughts on whether the Coromandel needs ferries, given the insecurity of roads there. Let us know what you think. 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The government has pulled the brakes on its sweeping transport vision for the next 3 years, saying Cyclone Gabrielle has changed the game. Cabinet last year signed off on a list of proposed transport priorities, putting climate change at the top of the list when it comes to how funding is spent. A briefing paper from October suggests using road maintenance funding to roll out more bus and cycle lanes. Speaking at a media briefing, the Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says a lot has changed since those decisions were made, including his promotion to the top job. He says he now expects resilience will be the top transport priority.
All governments have to deal with the reality that's right in front of them, and one of the realities that's right in front of us is that we have a transport network that has been shown to be wanting in a time when we're faced with a major catastrophe, and we have to put that front and centre of our decisions around transport planning and transport funding.
Is climate change going to be front and centre on your transport planning and building?
It'll still be in there, but as I've said, resilience is going to be right at the top of the priority list.
The Transport Minister, Michael Wood, this morning also told the Herald that fuel taxes could be hiked to help fund the investment. Mr Hipkins has quickly hosed down the possibility.
You will see that my track record here has been to reduce taxes on fuel, particularly at a time when fuel prices are otherwise higher than they have been previously. I don't intend to increase them at a time when we are actually trying to decrease them.
The government has today also announced another $26 million for cyclone-hit farmers and growers, more than doubling the initial fund. About $17.5 million has already been paid out to almost 3,000 applicants over roughly a fortnight. The world's first transgender politician, Georgina Beyer, has died. Friends of the groundbreaking politician and activist say she died this afternoon after a long illness. Her friends Scotty and Malcolm of Wellington's S&M's cocktail bar say the former Mayor of Carterton, local Labour MP, activist, dear friend and rainbow legend passed away peacefully at Mary Potter Hospice. They say she was surrounded by her nearest and dearest 24/7 over the past week. She accepted what was happening, was cracking jokes and had a twinkle in her eye right till the final moments. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins paid tribute to Georgina Beyer a short time ago.
I do want to extend my condolences to all those that Georgina was important and special to. I know that she had a very big following within the New Zealand community. She was our first transgender Member of Parliament, winning a general constituency seat. And making, I think, a lasting impression on the Parliament in the process. So I certainly think that Georgina has blazed a trail that has made it much easier for others to follow.
Prime Minister Chris Hipkins. Her friends Scotty and Malcolm say, farewell, Georgie. Your love, compassion and all that you have done for the rainbow and many other communities will live on forever. It is 5:20 and you're at Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Don't forget you can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. If you live on the Coromandel Peninsula, let us know your thoughts on the situation with the roads. 25 is down to a single lane pending some repairs, and 25A could be a year before that's fixed. 2101 on text. Time to go to the headlines now. Ko Eve Anō tēnei.
Gore District Council has been ordered to pay $129,000 over the death of 3-year-old Lachlan Jones, whose body was found in a council sewage pond in January 2019. Judge Russell Walker this afternoon waived a fine for the council for failing to maintain adequate fencing around the ponds, but he ordered it to pay $110,000 in reparation and almost $19,000 in prosecution costs. The government is more than doubling the size of its fund for cyclone-hit farmers and growers, injecting another $26 million into the immediate clean-up. About $17.5 million have already been paid out to almost 3,000 applicants. The insurance industry expects the floods in the Upper North Island over Auckland Anniversary weekend will cost it more than $1 billion. The Insurance Council says so far about 48,000 claims have been lodged and $111 million paid out. Another 30,000 claims have been lodged in relation to Cyclone Gabrielle. 2 teenagers charged with murdering a young father in Auckland have been remanded in custody. The 17 and 14-year-olds are accused of killing 28-year-old Joshua Tassi in a fatal road-related assault in Beach Haven on Friday evening. And the Prime Minister has paid tribute to Georgina Beyer, who died today, aged 65 after a long illness. Ms Beyer became the world's first transgender Member of Parliament when she won the Wairarapa seat in 1999. Mr Hipkins described her as a trailblazer. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, everything seems to be running smoothly for commuters around the country. There is this traffic news. The Rimutaka Hill Road section of State Highway 2 is closing for 4 mornings next week, Monday through Thursday, to carry out feral goat control. We'll have more news headlines and any other traffic news for you at 20 to 6.
Kia ora rā, e ho. The Black Ferns Sevens have continued their hot run of form after beating Australia 19-12 at the Vancouver leg of the World Series. We're joined by sports reporter Bridget Tunnicliffe. So, Bridget, the New Zealand women's sevens team, pretty unstoppable at the moment, eh?
They really are. So this is their fourth tournament win in a row after this afternoon's decider. So the Black Ferns led 14-7 at half-time, and a try from Georgia Miller pushed that out to 19-7. Australia responded to get within 7 with 2 minutes to go, and that's actually quite a long time in sevens, so a little bit of a tense final 2 minutes, but New Zealand didn't give them any more opportunities. So the Black Ferns extended their lead at the top of the World Series standings. So they'll be going to Hong Kong at the end of this month, the iconic leg of the Hong Kong series. They'll be going there really confident. And keep an eye out for 19-year-old Georgia Miller. She's got the platinum blonde ponytail. You can't miss her. And she's making a real splash on the World Series. And get this, Highland dancing is her other passion. So she started Highland dancing when she was 4 years old, and she wants to keep it up because she believes it's really good for her sevens. So one of those annoying, multi-talented people.
Absolutely. So how did the men go?
The All Black Sevens beat the USA 57. It was the fifth place playoff. Their hopes of a third consecutive tournament victory ended with defeat to Australia in the quarterfinals. But despite that, they still retain their spot on the top of the World Series standing. So both teams are in really good shape.
And the last game of the opening round of the ANZ Premiership is between the Stars and Tactic, and it's tonight in Papakura. What are you expecting? Who's going to come out on top?
Oh, I'm expecting the Tactics. They have built this sort of star-studded team. They were wooden spooners last year, but they've recruited Alia Dunn from the Pulse, the defending champs. They've got Jane Watson back, Silver Fern Jane Watson. She had a baby last year, and they recruited English international Laura Malcolm. There's a lot of anticipation building around the Tactics. A lot of people are picking a Tactics Mystics grand final. And the Stars, they've lost a bit of experience, including former Silver Ferns defender Anna Harrison. So that's why I'm going with the Tactics.
Thank you, Bridget. That's Bridget Tunnicliffe there with our sports news. Hundreds of essentially homeless Muriwai residents are in limbo, waiting to hear if the earth under and behind their homes is still moving and whether they'll ever be able to live in them again. Questions they couldn't get answers for at a community meeting last week. Instead, many residents were left angry after Auckland Council didn't bring a geotech expert along to address their concerns. There are now 128 red-stickered properties in the West Auckland Beach settlement with an additional 48 yellow-stickered. Auckland Council's Head of Engineering Resilience, geotechnical engineer Ross Roberts, joins us now. Kia ora, Ross.
Kia ora.
What can you tell us about the land at Muriwai? Is it still moving? How much information do you have?
Yeah, so we've been doing detailed surveys from a helicopter using LiDAR, which is a laser technique. We're doing it once a week at the moment, every weekend. And what that's shown us...
Sorry, Ross, can I just get you to move around a little bit? I'm really sorry to interrupt, but people will be eager to hear this, and your line is terribly scratchy, so maybe you can find another corner in the room where we might be able to hear you a bit better. Now, you were saying what kind of testing you're doing at the moment?
So we're using LiDAR, which is a laser technique from a helicopter, and that takes very detailed measurements of the ground surface just to tell us what level the ground is at, and by comparing surveys from one week to the next, it can tell us how it's moving. We've just today got back some results, and that shows us that from our first survey to the second survey 1 week later, in areas there was between 1 and 2 metres of movement in that ground. So there's still a fair amount of movement happening in some areas, particularly around the tops of the landslides that occurred a few weeks back.
Okay, so between 1 and 2 metres of movement, and you say at the tops of these landslides, are you talking about which ones specifically, Domain Road or Mutatara Road?
On both of those, actually. So we're seeing very similar patterns across both of those, and it's quite expected that we would get some movement in the weeks after these landslides because they have over-steepened the slopes. They've exposed them to being more susceptible to movement, and of course, with the terrible weather that we had recently, that would have triggered some more movement as well. So those factors have meant that there's been a bit more movement, and we're optimistic, though, that will slowly taper off over time.
And what are you seeing as a pattern, as a trend? Is it tapering already or not?
It's too early to say. It takes time. It takes time for these patterns to occur. So far, we've done 3 repeat surveys using the LiDAR. So our most recent one was on Saturday this week, and we've got to wait for those results to come back before we can start to see a pattern occurring.
Okay, so most recent Saturday and the ones you did previously, when were they?
Yeah, so they were the 2 weekends before that. So we've had a 7-day gap between each survey. We've done 3 so far, so that's 2 sets of change that we can identify.
And you say it takes time to know what the pattern is. How long?
Well, it depends really on the change in the ground and how predictable it is. So if we see that after a round of surveys and then second round of surveys, the third round of surveys fits the pattern, we can get more and more confidence about that. But if it's changing all the time, if it changes with the weather more significantly than it does with just progression naturally, then it takes a lot longer. We're optimistic that within a month or 2, we'll have a very clear pattern of what's going on. But even before then, we can start to make some preliminary assessments about what's happening and make a controlled plan for how we actually improve the situation on the ground for the people of Murray.
Okay, Ross, this is really important. You said within a month or 2. So do you think it will be 2 months before you can make any firm decisions about the future of the properties on the 2 particularly affected roads?
It's going to vary depending on particularly how far they are from the slope, so the level of risk. The ones further away from the slope, we're likely to be able to get a good idea within a month or 2. The ones very close to the slope could well take longer than that. And it really does depend on how those slopes respond to changes over the next month or 2. But it could take longer than a few months.
So are those the parameters for decision making? A month for those furthest away and 2 months for those closest? Or could it be longer for those who are closest to the moving earth?
It could certainly be longest for the ones closest to the moving earth. And examples from other areas around New Zealand have shown that where you get landslides like this, it can take 6 months or sometimes longer before you can actually have enough information to give people confidence to be able to get back into their homes in the worst locations. So for the ones...
So you can't rule that out, Ross? You can't rule out that it would be up to 6 months before some people know whether they can return to their properties?
Absolutely can't rule it out. And I wouldn't want to give people false optimism at this stage. As time goes on, we will get more information and more people will be able to get back into their homes. But there will be some who are in particularly challenging locations where we just won't be able to give that confidence for quite some period of time.
Okay, so Domain Road is a mix of situations, really. Some houses seemingly untouched and some close to the slip and some not. It's a winding sort of road that goes down a hill. And the residents basically say the whole neighbourhood is red stickered. Can you narrow that down rather than have a blanket call across that whole street?
Absolutely, and that's what we're working really hard on at the moment. We know that we can't get every single property changed overnight, but what we can do is get more detailed assessments, get more detailed modelling done, which will allow us to identify the ones that are lower risk from the ones that are higher risk and enable access to as many of those as we can.
How many houses have yet to have their first assessment, please?
So all the houses that are in the zone that we consider to be a risk have had an assessment.
Okay, what about reassessments to see if they can be downgraded from red or yellow or to whatever?
So the reassessments require that LiDAR data and the subsequent analysis that I was talking about to assess the risk.
Okay.
If we just go and reassess without new information, the result would be the same.
What's happening to these properties' land information? Are you marking them already?
I haven't been involved in the land information side of what's going on here. Anything that council holds and anything that council knows does have to go on a land information memorandum. So if there is information that is collected later, that will eventually end up on the land information memorandum. So that's great.
Appreciate your time, Ross. Thank you for joining us. That's Ross Roberts, who's Auckland Council's Head of Engineering Resilience. It is 28 minutes to 6. Kia amo tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And it is time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e nai anei, ko Nona Peltier, who joins me now in the studio. Nona, what are we guessing about today, please?
Well, let's talk about the insurance industry and what it is expecting from the damage that was caused. Let's just talk about the weekend. Auckland Anniversary Weekend. That was the flooding we call the North Island flooding event.
Yep.
So the cost of that has been estimated at about $1 billion to the insurance industry. They've received, 47,300 claims totaling $990 million from that event alone. And of course, there's going to be other costs that come up as we've just heard. There's other pieces still to be added to that. And on top of that, the industry has also received 30,000 claims related to Cyclone Gabriel. And now that's quite an interesting one. It's been likened to the Christchurch earthquake in terms of its damage. For sure, both those events together, the number of claims for those two events, that's the North Island flooding and Cyclone Gabriel, are twice what they received for the Kaikoura earthquake. The Christchurch earthquake, the official estimate of that is $13.5 billion of damage. That's the RBNZ, that's the Reserve Bank's estimate, that's the government finance minister's estimate, and it's also the estimate that Standard & Poor's, the rating agency, is using. There are other estimates of that damage, some as much as $77 billion, others $40 billion, but the official number is $13.5 billion. That's the one we're going to work with for now. But of course, that happened back in 2011. Times have changed since then. The country has grown, its balance sheet has grown, and there's been inflation. So what that ends up being, we don't know yet, but you can say from now that we're looking at a pretty major insurance claim ahead.
Okay, investors should brace themselves for more market volatility. Who says, and what's the reason?
Well, I've been talking to some analysts about the reporting season that we've just kind of wrapped up last week. And so basically we saw some pretty solid results from some of the biggest companies in New Zealand. That's a positive sign. But across the board, we saw pretty uncertain outlooks for what's coming up. And that points to volatility that the market's already seeing, not just here in New Zealand with the disasters we just talked about, with rising inflation, which we all know about, and higher interest rates, also a thing that's not been missed by the markets. Overall, though, there's also uncertainty in global markets, and that has to do with the uncertainty about what the U.S. Federal Reserve is going to do with its interest rate hikes. The market's worried about what they might be. We've seen them to be fairly large. We're going to hear from the U.S. Federal Reserve this week, though. The chair is going to be speaking to Congress either, I guess, Wednesday morning or Thursday morning our time. So we'll have to see what happens there. But overall, look, our index, it rose more than 1/3% today, which is positive. That was a 44-point gain to 11,912. The New Zealand dollar, though, is a bit weaker. And again, that has to do with the U.S. Federal Reserve there. 62.2 U.S. cents, 91.9 Australian, and 51.6 British pence. So there won't be reporting season news this week, but we'll have other stuff.
Of course. Thank you, Nona. Ka kite, Nona Peltier there with Business News. The father of a 3-year-old found dead in a council sewage pond has used today's sentencing to voice his concerns about the police investigation. Gore District Council appeared in court today after Lachlan Jones died in January 2019. The toddler's father, Paul Jones, does not believe he drowned. Timothy Brown was in the Gore District Court.
Judge Russell Walker began the sentencing hearing with a minute's silence. He waived a fine for the Gore District Council for failing to maintain adequate fencing around the ponds, saying it was a cost which would ultimately fall to ratepayers of the heavily indebted council. However, he ordered $55,000 be paid in reparation to each of Lachlan's parents, noting that in reality, no amount is enough.
Lockie's life is of course priceless. The impact of his loss is beyond comprehension to anyone who has not suffered the loss of a child. No amount of money can compensate for that loss. It's unquantifiable. All I can do is award an amount which is in line with other cases.
WorkSafe initially charged Gore District Council with failing to comply with a duty that exposed people to the risk of death or serious injury. In late December, the council pleaded guilty to a downgraded charge of failing to perform a duty. But Lachlan's father, Paul Jones, told the court he did not hold the council responsible.
It's in my view on the 29th of January 2019, the fencing and the gates at the Gore Council oxidation ponds had no bearing on the death of my son. and the council are no part responsible. My view that my son did not die from accidental drowning is well known. Thank you.
Lachlan was found dead in a council sewage pond in January 2019. The official account is that he accidentally drowned after wandering off from his mother's home. Outside court, Mr Jones called on the police to reopen the investigation into Lachlan's death.
Well, I ask that this, from today onwards, that this case be reopened by the police. I now ask Andrew Costa to come and front me.
Mr Jones says he's pleased to leave this court case behind him. He says he's received evidence that his son did not drown, as the police have ruled to be the case.
Now I can move on to finding out what actually did happen to my son. I've had 2 substandard police investigations that police are saying that my son drowned. I have now the proof that pathologists should have never come to that scenario that my son drowned.
Gore District Council Chief Executive Stephen Parry offered his sympathy to Lachlan's family.
As a parent myself, the loss of a child is beyond comprehension and awful to imagine. I feel deeply for Lachlan's parents. This has been truly a significant event for the council and haunting experience for our staff.
A number of Gore District councillors, including Deputy Mayor Keith Hovell, were in court during the sentencing. The council says it's renewed and strengthened the fencing around its sewage ponds as a result.
And that was Timothy Brown reporting. We've got an absolute flood of feedback on whether the Coromandel needs ferries, given the precarious nature of the roads there. Let's give you a taster. This is from Lee. Lee says, I live on the Thames coast. I think we need to have small piers or wharfs along the coast so that a ferry and delivery service can operate when the road is closed. At present, boats are used during this time, but they have to pull up to the beach. The piers would also be great for fishing, swimming, and would be a great addition to the coast. We'll get to some more of that a little later. 2101 if you want to join that conversation on text. Only 1 million census forms have been filled out ahead of the official census night. That's tomorrow, if you're wondering. Data from the survey is used by the government and other agencies to form policies, provide resources and address social issues. But it comes at a time when large parts of the country are in complete turmoil. Deputy Chief Executive Census and Collection Operations, Simon Mason, joins us now. Kia ora, Simon. 1 million, is that sort of, wow, does it meet your expectations thus far?
Yeah, so I was talking about my personal expectations this morning, just to be clear. We're actually over 1.1 million, and we'll probably get about 1.2 overall tonight, I suspect, just from seeing some of the figures today. So there's been quite a surge in people doing their census over today's, which has been really good to see.
How many do you need to make this statistically solid, if you like?
Well, we're using a combined model by design, and what that means this time is that we'll be using what we collect via the forms and combining that with administrative data, and we aspire to get about 98% of the coverage of the population using that mechanism. Now, we prefer to get people's responses by the form and census day, because that gives us the most current information. So it's really important that they do it via that mechanism rather than us relying on admin data.
Okay, so 98% combined, but as the census itself, I mean, what's the target in terms of returned filled out forms?
90%.
Right. You've got a long way to go.
Yeah, but it's not census day yet. So
Correct.
a lot of forms come in over census day and the following days as well, because a lot of people still use paper, and that takes a couple of days to get back to us and a couple of days to scan and make its way into our systems as well. So
how do you get paper, Simon? Because most of us would have got that letter with a code that you go onto the computer, right? So it assumes you've got internet, assumes you've got a computer. If you want a paper form, what's the deal?
Yeah, great question. So if you want a paper form, you can ring us on 0800 Census, and we'll get one out to you.
Right, and as you say, that'll take a few days.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Okay, so I mean, has there been enough prep gone into this? Because some people, well, they seem to be oblivious to the fact that there is a census. In some ways, it assumes people have access to devices and the internet. How many significant barriers do you think there are to filling this in?
For this census in 2023, we've really looked at what are the barriers and tried to our best to minimise those where they've existed. So particularly in the disabled space, there's large easy print forms, large print forms available. There's lots more materials as well, supporting materials online. I think we're up to about 26 different languages that we provide supporting materials as well. So if English or Te Reo is not your native tongue, then there's support available via those means. We've also got a public contact centre via that 0800 census number where people can ring in, and we've got people that speak a variety of different languages on that line as well, and they can help people fill in their census via that mechanism.
Who decides the questions? And this time round, what areas are you focusing on?
Do you mean geographic locations?
No, I mean in terms of the content of the question. Having filled out the form myself already, there is a number of questions around gender identity, disability, and the state of your housing, right? So I'm wondering who decides what topics you're asking the questions on, and what are you trying specifically to pinpoint here?
That's another good question. So first of all, thanks for filling out your census form. That's really pleasing to hear. In terms of the questions, we update we update some questions on a periodic basis every time we do a census. But the vast majority of questions are carried through from previous censuses, and they give us a really good picture and comparison between how previous censuses have gone, and makes it easier to compare ourselves with other countries. For additional questions, we test those in a variety of different ways, and really what goes into some of the new questions is how does society need to be reflected going forward. So some of the sex and gender questions are really reflective of our society as it is now, and helps those people, particularly in the rainbow community, identify themselves in the data, and enables people to make better decisions using that data. So those are the major changes to the census in 2023.
Simon, just very quickly, because we're out of time, but while we've been talking, we've got a question from a listener who says, our household has received 2 census letters with different codes. Should they be worried about that? Do they use the 2 codes? How does that work?
They should not be worried about that at all. In our efforts to be helpful, we have sent out 2 codes to 1.4 million houses. And if people have done the census, great, really appreciate that. You can dispose of the extra one that's come out. If you haven't done your census, pick your favourite colour on the envelope, and you can use that code to help you do the census.
Thank you for your time, Simon. That's Simon Mason, who's the Deputy Chief Executive, Census and Collection Operations. Tomorrow night is official census night. It is 5:45 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. If you live in Muriwai, not sure if you heard that interview with their geotech expert there, at least a few months before they find out if the Earth is moving less, potentially up to 6 months or more. Text us on 2101 with your thoughts. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Also interested in whether you've filled out your census form, email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to go to Evie now with the headlines. Anea Evie, mina pita pita kōrero.
Lisa. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says a lot has changed since Cabinet agreed emissions reduction should be its top transport priority. It had wanted to reallocate some road maintenance money into bus and bike lanes. It's now working on an emergency-style program to rebuild roads and bridges in the wake of Cyclone Gabrielle. The world's first transsexual mayor and MP, Georgina Beyer, has died this afternoon after a long illness. She was 65. Ms Beyer's election as mayor of Carterton in 1995 and then later as an MP attracted worldwide attention. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins has this afternoon described her as a trailblazer. A 16-year-old has pleaded guilty to manslaughter at the High Court in Whangarei. The youth, who has name suppression, killed Okaiho man Michael Biggins in September 2021 while aged 15. He was originally jointly charged with murder with another boy who was 12 at the time. The younger boy faces a murder trial on Wednesday. Testing has found aluminium levels exceeding the new drinking water standard of 1 milligram per litre on 3 Otago sites. The Clutha District Council says aluminium has been detected at North Bruce, South Richardson and Moa Flat. The Mayor, Brian Cadogan, says the council has been told there's a negligible risk to health. And the Kaitaki ferry will be out of service for at least 2 weeks because of a gearbox bearing fault. Inter Islander Executive General Manager Walter Rushbrook says a technician is coming from the Netherlands and other ships will make extra sailings. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, all main routes in the main centres seem to be running smoothly at the moment. Our next news and weather is at 6 o'clock.
Ngā mihi, Evie. Teachers agree the Qualifications Authority unwittingly made trial NCEA tests too difficult last year. Documents show the Education Ministry warned the authority that the way the reading, writing and maths tests were designed made them harder for some students. The assessments became a compulsory part of NCEA next year, and teachers are worried because just 34% of students passed the trial writing test. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
The Education Ministry told NZQA in October the online nature of the tests, the number of questions and some of the words used combined to make the tests harder than they should have been. A pilot in the middle of last year with Year 10 students had pass rates of 34% in writing, 56% in maths and 64% in reading. Pip Tinning from the English Teachers Association says the tests were pretty solid, but some teachers raised similar fears.
Some of the criticism that I have heard or that we've heard is around some of the language and some of the context of the questions. And I think that potentially is something that, had come through as a criticism and may need some review around who's setting those tests.
She says the tests must fairly assess if young people meet a basic level of literacy and numeracy.
The language needs to be really accessible at that level, and the context need to be appropriate for, the 2020s. I mean, we're 2023, so the context need to be really clear if we're asking our young people to access them. It's not a 40-year-old woman in a scarf doing it. It's a teenager.
Pip Tinning says changing the tests would improve results a little, but there will still be a significant problem with writing. The Deputy Principal of Hagley College, Mari Stribling, wrote to ministers about the reading and writing tests last year. She's not surprised the ministry identified problems, and she says it's time to abandon the whole exercise.
The best thing the government could do would be to ditch the tests at this point. I know it's a pretty major move, but I think the potential downsides are so major that I think that we really cannot afford for these tests to be implemented next year.
She says high-stakes literacy tests could significantly change the way schools work, and not for the better.
It's likely to reinforce a failure mindset for students who might already be marginalised. I think it's got the potential for us to return to a situation of streaming, which we've worked very hard over recent years to move away from.
James Cook High School trialled the tests, and its principal, Grant McMillan, says the ministry's criticism is very close to what he and his teachers observed.
It appeared that NZQA was actually rewriting the curriculum and setting a whole different standard of expectation, different to what the ministry actually requires from the curriculum. And when we'd been through about the third or fourth digital pilots, we were seeing the same things again. The fact that I'm a faster typer or not so fast a typer should not be a barrier or a definer of how well my literacy is measured.
He says he's worried the ministry and the Qualifications Authority disagree over such an important change.
I think the sad thing is that there's a disconnect between the agencies, and this stuff goes live in about 30 weeks from now, when the die is then set. So we don't have long to sort this, and that really worries me.
The Ministry and NZQA have told RNZ they're working together on the tests. The Qualifications Authority says it's made improvements, and it's confident the tests that will be trialled this year will be fair and accurate.
Education correspondent John Gerritsen there. It is 9 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. There were tense scenes outside court when two teenagers accused of murdering a 28-year-old in Auckland on Friday night appeared in court. The 17 and 14-year-old are accused of killing Joshua Tassi in a road rage attack in Beach Haven. Now, those social workers who come face-to-face with at-risk young people every day say compassion is needed. Finn Blackwell has the story.
Supporters clashed with security at the youth court today after only 5 supporters were allowed in, with one yelling for security not to touch them. The 14-year-old appeared via video link and the 17-year-old was standing in the dock. Supporters called out, "Stay strong and don't forget to pray." Their names and identifying features have been suppressed and they'll appear in the High Court at the end of the month. Peter Wolf is a manager at Kaipatiki Youth Development Trust, involved in providing support for rangatahi over the past 9 years. He says in a situation like this, the ripple effects are felt by everyone involved.
It's tragic. Lives have been destroyed for both victims and their family and for the people involved. It's going to have an impact on their family too. So no, there's no winners here in terms of this situation. It's tragic.
He says there are a number of important steps in reaching those most at risk.
If we have people around us to support us at a time of crisis, I suppose the outcomes are more positive. The less support's around us at a time of crisis, the more negative the outcomes. And that's what a lot of the evidence does show us.
Laura Martin and Sonia Nerney also work at Kaipatiki for their Steps to Success program. Laura says while there are many options young people can call on for support, they are often overwhelmed by choice.
There's so many resources out there, but whānau don't know which way to go to necessarily. So it's about streamlining those resources and having that one door that whānau locally can approach and walk into. They know that they have that web of directions and networks that they can be turned and supported to navigate alongside our mentors here.
And Sonia says their local focus helps them reach those in need.
We are quite well known within our local communities where connections are already formed, and also because this program has been going for 9 years, I've either worked with their siblings, cousins, relations, aunties around getting support into a future employment.
Casey Bennett works as a program lead for Youth Town in Hillcrest and says they want to bring similar at-risk youth programs to the North Shore.
We're thinking about bringing programs onto the shore like YEP, which is a youth employability program, or something like GROW, who kind of targets more of those kids. We currently have them out south, so we're hoping to bring something over on the shore.
She says they're also in touch with schools, who bring kids to their attention when they need extra support. As for the teens charged with murder, they'll be receiving support from the youth justice system while they wait for their next appearance in 3 weeks' time.
It is 5 minutes to 6. An octogenarian training to be an early childhood educator reckons he's got more in common with his young charges than you might think. Mike Carter was a maths teacher and after retiring started volunteering, playing ukulele and reading to children at daycare. Now he's less than 6 months away from finishing his ECE qualification, working part-time 3 days a week at the Blue Cottage Early Learning Centre in Papamoa. But Mike says for him, it's not really work.
Was there between 7 months and 5. I'm basically, I'm not teaching. You don't teach at these places. You give them experiences. You get them to enjoy socialising, putting Lego together, painting, playing, yelling "Yee-haw, yee-haw" when you're singing "Till We Come Around the Mountains."
So the kids that you are, giving these experiences to, you've said they start from, 7 months and up, and you are how old, Mike?
I'm 86, pushing 87.
When you say pushing 87, when's your birthday?
It's September.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're miles away from 87.
That's right, yeah, 6 months away.
So, I mean, what do you have in common with these kids, do you think?
I was thinking about that, and it's definitely there is a correlation. Like, well, if you start physically, we have teeth problems. I guess they have teething problems. We as a very old generation, have our own teeth to worry about. They're falling out. We have eyesight problems, or we can't see all that well. We're dealing with kids from 7 months to 5 years, and those 5 years, they change enormously. And we're going downhill, but they're changing, going uphill. And we get looked down upon, patronised by the younger generation, our 50-year-old kids, and these kids, the little Tamariki, the 3 or 4 year olds, well, they're reliant so much on parental care and trust and love. So there's that similarity. And yeah, well, I won't venture out crapping in pants or wetting your pants or incontinence, but there is that hovering in the background.
How do they react to you? What kind of things do they say, Mike?
Look, they don't actually take me as anything but part of the program. I'm there. I'm somebody who has fun with them, who will sit in the tan pit and say, "Yep, I'd like a cup of tea, please," and they'll hand out the pot with some sand in it and say, "Here you are," right? And I'll say, "Thank you very much." Wind up, and it's just fun. And then we sit around, and I get the ukulele down. And
what's your go-to on the ukulele, Mike?
Oh, tunes! Oh, there's heaps of tunes they know. They know. She'll be coming around the mountain. That's one I've introduced, and they've got the sense of rhythm to go yee-haw, yee-haw in the right place, and that's good. And you name it. When the Saints coming in, 1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock rock.
God, you've got some big numbers there, Mike. Tell me, what is the highlight of your day when you go into work at the Blue Cottage? What is the thing that you love the most about this?
Well, first of all, it's not work. Okay, that as far as I'm concerned, there'd be work for a lot. For those people who are there all day, yes, I can imagine they'd come back and feel exhausted and they've done a day's work. But I don't. I go there for 2 or 3 hours and I come out refreshed and energised.
Sounds like a cracker of a day, a cup of sand tea and bashing out when she comes around the mountain on the ukulele. Hey, Evie. And it's not work, he reckons. Fantastic.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening. I'm Evie Ashton. The Prime Minister says a lot has changed since Cabinet agreed emissions reduction should be its top transport priority. The government has U-turned on its 3-yearly transport plan in the wake of Cyclone Gabrielle. It had wanted to reallocate some of the money normally spent on road maintenance into bus and bike lanes. Cabinet is now working on an emergency-style program to rebuild roads and bridges. Chris Hipkins says the government has to reprioritise.
A lot has changed in the last couple of months that are going to have a bearing on the final GPS. It will change from what was previously consulted on. Clearly, there's been a change in leadership of the government, but also we've dealt with an event that is going to have a significant impact on transport infrastructure and where we have to prioritise.
The proposed transport plan will go out for consultation this year. Auckland Council's Head of Engineering Resilience says it could be 6 months' wait for homeowners on 2 roads affected by landslips at Muriwai before they know if they can live in their properties again. Geotechnical engineer Ross Roberts told Checkpoint it will be 1 or 2 months before the future of the affected properties can be confirmed, as the earth around them is still unstable. There are 128 red-stickered properties in the West Auckland Beach settlement, with an additional 48 yellow-stickered. The government is more than doubling the size of its fund for cyclone-hit farmers and growers, injecting another $26 million into the immediate clean-up. About $17.5 million has already been paid out to almost 3,000 applicants over roughly a fortnight. Pastoral and arable farmers can receive up to $10,000. For growers, the cap is $40,000 depending on their size. The father of Lachlan Jones has called on the police to reopen the investigation into his son's death. The Gore District Council has this afternoon been ordered to pay $129,000 over the 3-year-old's death. Lachlan was found dead in a council sewage pond in January 2019. He's believed to have drowned after wandering off from his mother's home, but his father, Paul Jones, doesn't accept the police version of events.
Now I can move on to finding out what actually did happen to my son. I've had 2 substandard police investigations. That police are saying that my son drowned. I have now the proof that pathologists should have never come to that scenario that my son drowned.
Paul Jones says he wants to meet with Police Commissioner Andrew Costa. 2 teenagers charged with murdering a man in Auckland have been remanded in custody. The 17 and 14-year-olds are accused of killing a young father in a fatal road-related assault in Beach Haven on Friday evening. Finn Blackwell was in court.
28-year-old Joshua Tarsi died at the scene while passers-by tried to help. Supporters clashed with security at the youth court today after only 5 were allowed in. Inside, the 14-year-old appeared via video link and the 17-year-old was standing in the dock, both charged with murder. The youth's names and identifying details have been suppressed and they'll appear in the High Court at the end of the month.
The world's first transgender politician, Georgina Bayer, has died. Friends of the groundbreaking politician and activist say she died at 3:30 this afternoon. They say she'd been surrounded by her close friends and family over the past week and that she'd accepted what was happening and cracking jokes right until the final moments. At Ms Bayer's request, there'll be no funeral service, but a memorial service will be held at a later date. Teachers agree the Qualifications Authority accidentally made trial NCEA tests too hard last year. Documents show the Education Ministry warned the design of the reading, writing and maths tests made them more difficult for some. Education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The tests become a compulsory part of NCEA next year, and trials have had pass rates as low as 34% for writing. Now, documents show the Education Ministry told NZQA in October the online nature of the tests, the number of questions and some of the words used made the tests harder for some groups of students, especially Māori and Pacific teenagers. Teachers say that matches their observations of the trials. They say the Ministry and the Qualifications Authority need to get it right.
The Kaitaki ferry will be out of service for at least 2 weeks because of a gearbox bearing fault. Inter-Islander Executive General Manager Walter Rushbrook says a technician is urgently travelling to New Zealand from the Netherlands to investigate the problem. Meanwhile, the company's putting on extra sailings of the Kaiarahi and Aratere ferries for passengers and the Valentine to move freight. Walter Rushbrook says the Inter-Islander fleet is ageing, which is why 2 new ships will enter service over the next few years. A rescue helicopter is en route to the scene of a serious crash near Matamata. The police say 4 people have been injured, 1 seriously in the crash at the intersection of McLaren and Alexandra roads. And authorities in Greece have detained and charged a station master for his alleged role in a train crash that killed at least 57 people last week. His lawyer, Stefanos Panzazidis, spoke to reporters.
The accused said everything. He told the truth. He was devastated. He said exactly what happened without fear that his words would make him bear more responsibility. If there is evidence that constitutes criminal offences against him from what he said, it is something that justice will decide.
The head-on collision between 2 trains near Larissa has sparked widespread anger over poor safety and cost-cutting. That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. On 9 to noon tomorrow, the country's largest insurer on the mountain of claims it's working through and the thousands of homes it estimates are at risk of severe flooding. What's driving an increase in celiac disease? And just how easy is it to avoid gluten? Dr. Christy Goodwin shares tips for dealing with digital distraction without completely breaking up with your devices. And Amber Clyde was the only girl at the skate park as a youngster. She's now empowering a new generation of girls on boards. With me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Northland, Auckland and Waikato. A few showers, one or two possibly heavy today, especially in Northland. Clearing to fine in Waikato this evening and elsewhere tomorrow. Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Rotorua. Showers, possibly heavy about Coromandel Peninsula through this afternoon. Clearing from the south this evening. Fine tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, scattered showers, easing this evening, clearing to fine tomorrow. From Waitomo to Wellington, including the central high country and Wairarapa, mainly fine. Isolated showers about Wairarapa, clearing this afternoon. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine weather. Bulla and Westland, fine today. Showers developing tomorrow, turning to rain in Westland tomorrow evening. Fiordland, Otago and Southland, mainly fine. Rain developing in Fiordland tomorrow afternoon with a few spots of rain spreading elsewhere tomorrow evening. And for Dekohu Chatham Islands, rain easing to showers this evening, clearing tomorrow. The time is 7 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Thanks, Evie. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A major state highway around the Coromandel Peninsula has been reduced to one lane and light vehicles only after a washout caused by more rain. State Highway 25 from Whangamata to Hikowai has been undercut with earth under the road slipping away. It's yet another blow to the district that relies heavily on visitors and supplies being delivered by road and where lots of children commute to school. On top of that, State Highway 25A has been completely washed away in the January floods and could take more than a year to fix. That road's a key link to towns like Whangamata, Pawanui, Tairua, Hotwater Beach and Hahei. Well, joining us now is Thames Coromandel Mayor Len Salt. Len, the situation with State Highway 25 sounding a bit ropey, isn't it?
Tēnā koe, Lisa. Yes, there's no doubt about it that our roading structure is vulnerable. We are very susceptible to any weather events and it's been challenging. There's no doubt about it.
How worried are you that this is going to get worse? So you're down to one lane on 25 and Waka Kotahi says no guarantee more of the road won't disappear.
That's right. So we're waiting for geotech reports, but we're nervous. As we go through this period of uncertainty as far as the weather is concerned, what we're sensing now amongst the people in our district is a very much heightened level of anxiety about the weather. When we had State Highway 25A in there between Kopu and Hikowai, it gave us an alternative. Now that alternative is really got to be taken off the table for 9 months to a year, as you said earlier. Then it leaves the rest of the roading network in such a vulnerable state that we'd be pretending to say that we weren't anxious about it, and all our people are. We're pretty resilient. Our roading crews are really good at getting things back on track, but we are very vulnerable to weather at the moment.
Len, can you put it in perspective? What does this road mean for the district in terms of, children getting to school, visitors that you rely on, trucks bringing you groceries, all of that kind of stuff?
So the only other alternative to access the peninsula at the moment is through Kopu, Thames, up the Thames Coast Road, around the top through Coromandel and down through Whitianga. Now, obviously, that's a much longer route, especially if you're starting from the Whangamata end. It's a long way around. It is the only alternative, and it does put enormous pressure on business people, on the tourism and hospitality people. If our roading crews can keep that open to one lane, even in the interim, it's not as bad as what you've seen the pictures of State Highway 25A in terms of the scale of it. So I'm really hoping, we're staying optimistic, I'm hoping that the guys can get in there and put a fix in there that at least get things moving again, but it's just too early to say that. But there's no doubt it puts a lot of pressure on getting supplies and services around the rest of the district.
Len, I don't want to be a downer, but State Highway 25A started as a couple of cracks in the road.
It did. And, everybody who drove over that section of road and saw those cracks, because it was down to one lane and then it was closed from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I guess the main difference is that I've been up to 25A. I've seen the height of that drop, and it was a big drop. It's a big distance between where the road was and the bottom of that gully. The one that we're looking at in State Highway 25 is not anywhere near as extensive as that. So I'm hoping that the crews will say, okay, well, we can get something in there, even if it's a Bailey Bridge or something, just to keep that gap going. It's nowhere near on the scale of 25A. So it makes us nervous, but I don't think it's anywhere near on that scale at this stage.
Could you put a figure on how much this is costing your district economically, lost revenue, lost
still
productivity?
Telling. Oh, look, and that's the big question, Lisa. That's the bit that keeps me awake at night, because essentially we have three main industries in our district. That's tourism, aquaculture and forestry. And all of those industries require the access to the roads. We need to get people around the district. So the losses for us in terms of 2 years of COVID and then essentially lost 2 months of summer for our tourism industry is huge. The roading cost to rehabilitate our local roads alone is in the tens of millions. So there's some big conversations that we're having at the moment with the government about long-term roading resilience, because we can't keep patching up. We've got to have some certainty in our roading network, and that's the discussion that we're having with them at the moment.
Have you had any guarantees from them that indeed they will give you 25A back or something, like for like to replace that?
We've had absolute assurances from the government and from Waka Kotahi that money's not an object in terms of getting 25A back up and running. They'll do whatever they need to do to get that connection reinstated. So money's not the problem, it's just time and the pure logistics of what's involved. It's a huge span. So money's not an object. What we would like to get some certainty on, and we continue to ask this question, is the rest of the roading network. We have to have some certainty for our business people, for our communities, for our social and economic well-being going forward, because without that certainty, we're going to have some hard questions to answer going forward in the future.
Len, we've been talking about ferries, right? And we're getting a lot of feedback from people on this, whether you need a few up and down either side of the coast, to get
Great
tourists
idea.
in and also to bring supplies in if your roads do go out. Thoughts, please?
Yeah, so absolutely. I had a conversation with Fuller's Ferries not long ago and said, guys, we'd love to get this up and running again between Auckland and Coromandel. They're struggling for staff and for crew. We're having an active conversation with the government about opening the doors to allow skilled people back in, so that's ongoing. Ferries to the rest of the Coromandel, we're having those discussions as well, and we've had some good offers. We're looking at all options,
who's offering, Len? Who's offering, Len?
So, I'll give you an example. We've got the Hauraki Maori Trust Board. We're really, really strong business community, and they run mussel barges. And so we've had a conversation started with them about, hey guys, what about we could incorporate the mussel barges with you folks it's a 4-hour trip from Coromandel up to Auckland, and they've opened the door and said maybe we can help with that. So there's one example right there, which is fantastic.
Len, it's not pie in the sky stuff. You're actually seriously looking if you can get some kind of ferry network going.
We'll look at every opportunity. So no, it's not pie in the sky. This is real stuff that we're talking about.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. That is the Thames Coromandel Mayor, Len Salt there, talking about potential for ferries, because boy, have they got some road problems. A lot of you getting in touch on this topic as well. This listener says, as a long-time Tairua resident, yes, it's about time the government looked at the Blue Highway for heavy traffic on the Coromandel Peninsula. Logging trucks impact the state of our roads. Ports at Whitianga, Coromandel and maybe Tairua and Whangamata would be a good idea to take logs to Tauranga. Also ferries from Auckland to Whitianga and Coromandel for people and cars. This into I live in Whangamata. The road between Whangamata and Waihi was not great before the cyclones. A popular tourist highway plus a huge number of logging trucks travelling over it. Whiritoa Hill is a particular weak spot, and if that slips, then we're stuck. Another, why can't Fuller's 360 start the ferry service to Coromandel Town? Given the state of the roads and the huge amounts of money being poured into bitumen sinkholes, it would give both the locals and tourism some much needed support and relief. That from Trini. Thanks for getting in touch. 2101 for your thoughts on that one, or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The North Island's Tararua district remains under a state of emergency after Cyclone Gabrielle, with roads still closed and flooded communities cleaning up. Settlements on the coast east of Palmerston North are particularly hard hit. Our reporter Jimmy Allingham takes a look.
The waters of the Wainui River have receded, but their destructive path has left a trail of debris in the coastal settlement of Herbertville.
So this is our biggest problem at the moment, silt. It's still soft enough to move, but it's too soft to pick up and get rid of yet. So we've actually got a local digger driver down here with a little digger and bucket and blade, and he's pushing it into piles so that at some stage we can get a bigger digger in and a truck in and clean it out.
I'm walking around the Herbertville campground with its manager, John Sedcole. He says during the cyclone, the driveway was underwater.
There would have been 200 mil of water rushing in that direction. Right across the road was covered, hence the houses all over the other side were underwater, whereas our cabins here are high enough off it went underneath them, and it also missed all these batches just out here, it went underneath them, and yet they're the closest ones to the river.
Not all dwellings were as lucky.
But this house here was completely swamped from one end to the other, which was very unfortunate. And what made it worse was they're due to get married this weekend out here. So,
and all their things, this is all their things just standing here drying?
Yeah, I've just moved them from room to room as I cleaned the mud out of it went over the top of the fence here.
5 permanent residents were at the campground when the flood hit. Among them, only one caravan suffered damage. For now, Mr. Sedcole's waiting in hope for more dry weather so the campground can reopen. Across the road at the Herbertville Inn, owners Michelle Rampling and Ian Smith are still clearing up mud, which found its way into every room.
Well, the kitchen's a little bit lower. All this is lower here, so it all swept through here.
So these are the rooms that people stay in, or?
Yes, they're beautiful rooms. Nice beds, comfy beds. We had a dining area up there for tea and coffee and stuff.
Nothing was spared.
And down here again, it's a bit lower, and we had freezers and fridges in here, and the freezers actually floated over onto the side, and we had a couple in here, and the washing machine's still got to go. And out here it was just it was just mud everywhere.
The pair were in Napier when the cyclone struck and couldn't get back for 3 days. Like the campground, Mr. Smith says he's not sure when the inn will open again.
Yeah, once you get rid of the carpet, it really dries out quite fast. When we first come here, it was quite slushy, the mud, and it was quite high. It was like a foot high full of mud or something, and that's all subsided now, and now it's kind of manageable to scoop out with a shovel, which makes it kind of a little bit easier.
A few kilometres inland, Wimbledon was largely spared by the floodwaters racing past, except James Harold's property, down a slight dip. He's lost possessions, but the water didn't come inside his house, although, like at Herbertville, it left its mark.
Probably, about 6 inches of mud on everything that's not supposed to be there. Wasn't there before the flood, and now I've just been scraping it away into piles and making a good drainage access point out the back of our yard. That's a bit of a mess.
Tararua Mayor Tracy Collis says late last week 14 roads in the district remained closed, and while whole communities are no longer cut off, some properties are.
The land is still moving. We are still saturated in Sodom. We've had a couple of fine days, which has been really, really helpful for the clean-up. But almost each day, we've had another slip come down, which is where it's so wet it doesn't take much.
The district's been hit hard in recent years, and roads were pockmarked with slips and washouts before Gabrielle struck.
The task ahead is massive. We will need to work with our communities, Waka Kotahi and the government. We're looking forward to the task force terms of reference being set up, meeting with the Minister, having a look at, which of these roads, which of them are going to be resilient, which can we build back, how can we build them back better.
Tararua may not have been affected as much as some parts of the country, but the remote district faces a long clean-up.
It is 21 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. China has announced a big boost in military spending and says it'll train soldiers under combat conditions. Beijing's annual Congress has set a modest target for post-pandemic economic growth this year. As the BBC's Stephen McDonnell reports, the gathering is also being used by Xi Jinping to further consolidate his power.
The message to this mass gathering was that the government here has a plan for post-pandemic recovery after Xi Jinping's standing took a hit from the strict anti-COVID measures which hurt many people's livelihoods. The Premier defended the party's handling of COVID.
We overcame difficulties. We succeeded in maintaining an overall stable economic performance.
Ditching zero COVID has brought the economy back to life, and a 5% growth target was announced for this year. Analysts think this is conservative.
People are flocking to the major cities in search of opportunities, and the rebound is, I would say, better than expected originally.
People told us they're definitely spending more.
We are going out with friends, eating and drinking.
The COVID restrictions really affected business, and now we are back to normal.
China's economy is already rebounding, but it is, after all, coming off a pretty low base following years of pandemic. Now there are concerns that these key economic roles within government are all to be filled with Xi Jinping loyalists who won't be giving him the frank and fearless advice he needs to be hearing about the trajectory of the country. The outgoing Premier is a respected economist from a different power bloc to Mr. Xi. The man expected to replace him was once Xi Jinping's chief of staff. It seems everyone now is from Team Xi.
Large rallies have taken place across Israel for the 9th consecutive week. Tens of thousands of demonstrators gathered in Tel Aviv to protest the government's plans to overhaul the judicial system. Police used water cannon to clear the crowds. There are also clashes in Jerusalem. The government's reforms would allow ministers to choose Supreme Court judges and would limit the court's powers. Critics describe it as an attack on democracy. The BBC's Sofia Batitza reports.
For the 9th week in a row, tens of thousands of Israelis took to the streets, in the capital, Jerusalem, and in Tel Aviv. They've been protesting against a controversial plan by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that would allow ministers to choose Supreme Court judges and would limit the court's powers.
Tonight we came to express our democratic rights and to fight for what's right and to hope that there will be a constitution and the separation of authorities will remain as it is and will improve without impulsive reforms and without crazy people in the parliament.
Parliament includes a number of nationalist religious parties that have made changes to the justice system a key priority. They say that the Supreme Court needs to be reined in from overreaching into the political sphere. But many fear that this will weaken the court and give the government too much influence when appointing judges.
The separation of powers is very important, and they want to cut the judicial independence, and I think it's very dangerous. Besides, what's very dangerous is the way this government is treating Palestinians and the fact that it wants to annex the big parts of the West Bank. It's very extreme, nationalist, racist, religious, even fascist government.
These were the largest demonstrations so far against the government's judicial reforms. They were largely peaceful, but later in the night, things turned violent. Some people broke down barricades. and blocked highways. The police used water cannons to clear the crowds. And things are getting increasingly tense. Earlier this week, police in Tel Aviv fired stun grenades at protesters. But with many people fearing that democracy in Israel is under threat, tensions are likely to get worse.
An historic agreement to protect the world's oceans has been approved after 10 years of talks. The High Seas Treaty aims to safeguard marine life in 30% of the areas that don't belong to any single country. Most of those areas are currently unprotected. The deal, which has been finalised at the UN in New York, has been hailed as a significant step by environmental campaigners. The BBC's Ismail Stellart reports.
The high seas are home to most of the world's marine life, some 2 million species which provide food, jobs and medicines needed for human survival. After 2 straight days of negotiations, countries have agreed for the first time to work together to protect these ocean regions.
The ship has reached the shore. We will formally adopt the text in all 6 official languages of the United Nations.
The world's international waters, or high seas, aren't controlled by any nation. Until now, all countries had a right to fish, ship and research in these areas. But it's left the animals and plants living there vulnerable. 10% of monitored species are at risk of extinction.
I think that this treaty that will lay the groundwork for creating 30% of the ocean into marine sanctuaries that cannot be fished in is so important. We have to save these creatures.
Talks were deadlocked for years, mostly over how genetic material from plants and animals found in the high seas should be shared between nations. Several important drugs, including treatments for COVID, HIV and cancer, were developed from marine life. The potential for profit is huge. Now, richer nations have promised to give a share of the proceeds from any products developed from the deep ocean to developing countries. The problem they still face is working out the value of the deep seas.
It's a little bit hard to even wrap our heads around how big and how distant these areas are. So if you imagine like a big high-definition widescreen TV, and if only like 3 or 4 of the pixels on that giant screen are working, that's kind of our knowledge of the deep ocean. Like we don't know so much of what's going on.
An agreement might have been reached, but that is just the first step. Before it enters into force, 60 countries need to sign the treaty and incorporate it into their national legislation. It is hoped this will be finished within a few years.
Before we head off, some of your feedback on the census. Mary's got in touch to say, I've received nothing. Another person says, good luck with getting through on the phone. I gave up. More positive from this listener. Citizens Advice Bureau are able to help people complete online and paper forms. We have been helping a lot of people this past week, especially in Auckland. So if you need help, that's where you can get it from. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the evening. If you missed anything from the program, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō. Tomorrow from 5 a.m, First Up meets Harry Styles fans already gathering at Mount Smart Stadium 24 hours ahead of his concert to buy merchandise. Hope they've got their feather boas. Can't wait to hear that one. 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. And then we'll be with you at the other end of the day. Catch you then.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. Auckland Council says the ground in Muriwai is still moving by up to 2 metres in places, 3 weeks on from a slip that killed 2 firefighters. Some homeowners may have to wait up to 6 months to find out if they can move back. State Highway 25 in Coromandel has partially reopened to light vehicles after a slip between Hikuwai and Whangamata last night. The Prime Minister is hosing down suggestions he might hike fuel taxes in the near future to fund major transport investment. And at her own request, there'll be no funeral service for Georgina Bayer, who died today. Ms Bayer became the world's first transgender Member of Parliament. A memorial service will take place at a later date. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Pacific Waves.
Bringing Kiribati back into the forum.
Diving into the big stories of the region